Humanism. The term humanism was derived from Studia Humanitatis, which means studies of humanity. Humanistic movement started in the early part of the 14th century during Renaissance. Like the ancient Greeks, the Renaissance humanists aimed for the development of the intellectual, spiritual, and physical capacities of a person through education. History of physical games, exercises, and study of Greek language was included in humanists' concept of liberal education. The humanistic tradition in Italy. Individualistic humanism prevailed in Italy was lasted for about a century. It stressed the freedom of an individual as a basic means in the achievement of a rich and fulfilled life. Italian humanism, the defining movement of the Renaissance, was a system of learning that produced a cultural renewal in Europe through the study and adoption of ancient Greco-Roman culture. Dante Alighieri, Petrarch, and Vittorino da Feltre are three of the popular humanists in Italy. Casa Giocosa or Happy House was administered by da Feltre. It became well known for its being different from the educational institutions of the time. The Feltre opened the school even to the children of the poor. It was one of the first to extend education to a wider public.
The humanistic tradition in Northern Europe. While humanism was rapidly taking root in Italy, an organization of pious and socially minded men known as Brethren of the Common Life or Hieronymians was facilitating the spread of humanistic spirit in Northern Europe. The group aimed at combating ignorance, especially of the lower class, by instruction in the scriptures. The group started their work in education by setting up hostels for students, then eventually establishing schools. Some of the most important humanists from Netherlands and Germany attended these schools. The proponents of social humanism attempted to establish an educational system based on democratic principles. They believed that they could only be possible if schools on all levels, elementary, secondary, and tertiary, would undergo reforms and be made available not only to the elite but the masses as well. In other words, social humanism is meant education for all. Some humanists from Northern Europe gained popularity by putting into practice the Amendment education principles that were laid down by the movement. One of them was Desiderius Erasmus, from 1467 to 1536 from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He became the teacher in Greek and Latin at Cambridge University and also in universities in Italy, France, and Germany. He published the New Testaments in Greek, later translating into Latin. Erasmus was known for the educational work, liberal education of children, and on the order of study, where he advocated the importance of studying the characteristic of the child using play games in the teaching learning process, and his opposition to the use of harsh and brutal discipline. He suggested that education be in accordance with the needs of the society. He likewise believed that women should enjoy the same educational rights enjoyed by men. Another notable scholar in education was Johann Storm from 1507 to 1589 of Strasbourg in Germany. Johann Sturm is another Nobel scholar and educator from Starnberg in Germany. He was the founder of the gymnasium, in school attended by a large number of students, mostly from the noble families. This school, which was under the control of municipality, was maintained through the tuition fees of the student. Classes were devoted exclusively to the teaching of Latin and Greek. Storm influences spread rapidly throughout Germany as an outcome of his published textbooks and his method of training teaching in the gymnasium. However, Storm somehow neglected the teaching of the vernacular and of mathematics and science. The curriculum was not relevant to the needs of the time and physical training was neglected. In England, humanism was received with enthusiasm. a prominent English humanist by the name of Roger Ascham from 1515 to 1568. He spearheaded this awakening of English people. Ascham was a professor of Greek in Cambridge University and a private tutor of Queen Elizabeth. Ascham wrote the book The Schoolmaster, which was published in 1571 after his death. In this textbook, he condemned brutal corporal punishment and other inhuman practices prevalent in English schools of those days. He was known for his double translation method, where a pupil is required to translate a passage into English and then retranslate it into the original. He is credited for being the first Englishman to write an educational practice in the vernacular. Ciceronianism was considered as humanistic education at its worst. The Ciceronians argued that the aim of education was to impart in the student a perfect Latin style. This refers to the system speaking or writing wherein often has to avoid the use of colla colossal term and most strictly follow the rules of Latin grammar. Cicero, noted Roman statesman, lawyer, scholar, and writer, was the admitted master of this style. The Ciceronianism maintained that all schools' work should be confined to the study of the writings of Cicero or of his full of his followers, and that all conversation and writings should be in Caesarean praise, a system of speaking and writing that is characteristically Cicero's. To many educators at the time, this was considered too limiting, and the Ciceronian school of thought was the subject of many debates and arguments. For one, it was vehemently criticized and opposed by Erasmus, who even wrote entire the Ciceronians.
Reformation. As you can see in the picture, during medieval times, the Catholic Church held so much power until 16th century. It was controlled by the Pope. However, this power gives rise to the corruption within the church. Catholic Church committed a lots of sin like adultery, incest, sodomy, simony, using money to secure the papal office, rape, drunkenness, and even murder. These sins committed by the leaders of the church. They are using their position to abuse their people. Showed in the picture that for those citizens who criticize the abusive and corrupt church leaders will condemn for heresy and punish by excommunication. And for those who found guilty of betraying the church were sentenced to death by the Inquisition. Showed in the picture was the image of Pope Boniface VIII. During his reign, the Catholic Church institutionalized the sale of indulgences. Boniface is a personal and public enemy. Benedito Quetane, a talented and ambitious scholar of canon law, rose quickly through the ranks of the church and was elected pope as Boniface VIII. Soon after the abdication of Pope Celestine V in 1294, there were rumors that Boniface had intimidated Celestine into abdicating so he could become Pope himself. The Pope was not only the spiritual head of Christendom, but also superior to the emperor in the circular temporal realm. Showed in the picture was the indulgences. Indulgence is defined by Reverend Charles Hart in the Student Catholic Doctrine as the remission of a sin through a temporal punishment or penance. Penance. Indulgence, meaning in Roman Catholic Church, a grant by the Pope of remission of the temporal punishment in purgatory is still due to foreseen after absolution. The unrestricted sale of indulgences by pardoners was widespread abuse during the later Middle Ages. The picture showed was the ecclesiastical law book. This book that requires a Catholic to confess the sins he or she has committed, and the priest would prescribe the penance. After performing a penance, the person would allow to take the communion. As you can see in the picture showed, at the height of the corruption of the church, some priests stopped prescribing penance but instead required their parishioners to pay an amount of money corresponding to the gravity of the sin, in the process paying for the indulgence for the sin.
Martin Luther's Reformation. Martin Luther is a German theologian, a religious, who was a Catholic. He participated a movement that reformulated certain basic tenets of Christian belief. He is one of the most influential figures in the history of Christianity. He gives rise to Protestantism as the third major force within Christendom, alongside Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox. Catholic Church doctrine and practices triggered a series of proceedings that culminated in ethical reforms, reformations, and motions, introduced new religious, political, and economical trajectories to Europe and the world. Martin Luther believed that salvation is a gift God alone grants to sinners who passively affirm their faith in Christ, that Eucharist is a sacrament that undergoes consubstitutions as opposed to substitutions, and the Church is an egalitarian priesthood of all believers, and that hierarchically between laity and clergy. Also, Luther believed that state should control the support elementary school and that the parents should obligate to send their children to school. He advocated to provide children with knowledge of the scriptures, and teaching should be a humanistic education in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Martin's new humanistic life confirmed to a commitment that countless men and women made through the centuries and existed devoted to interweaving of daily work and worship. He celebrated his first Mass in May 1507 with a great deal of fear and trembling on his own recollections, and also he began to publish theological writings entitled Depositions against Scholastic Theology, a 95 thesis view at first albeit hesitant manifest of all theology. Then thank you.
Melanchthon's educational contributions. I have here a quote. It say, "We must seek the truth, love it, defend it, and hand it down uncorrupted to our posterity." Philipp Melanchthon is a German theologian. Philipp Melanchthon was a German Lutheran reformer, collaborator with Martin Luther, the first systematic theologian of the Protestant Reformation, intellectual leader of Luther Reformation was basically on religion. He put emphasis on education. His educational tenets were realized by his disciple friend Philip Melanchthon, considered the preceptor of Germany due to his popularity as a professor at Wittenberg. His lecture on Protestant theology drew hundreds of students to the university. In 1528, Melanchthon was requested by the Elector of Saxony to organize the state school system, later to be known as the Saxony Plan. The plan is known as Secondary School System and the history. It was based on the report of Book of Visitation, regarded by modern educators as the first school survey report and history. It provides for a Latin school in every town and the village in Saxony. However, in 1559, a system modifying the Saxony plan, the Württemberg plan, was implemented. This provided for a comprehensive educational system, from vernacular schools teaching reading, writing, counting, church hymns, and religion, to Latin school of 6 classes, teaching the classes to the university level. Melanchthon obtained considerable success in making Reformation acceptable to the intellectual as Luther had made it acceptable to the masses.
Let us now proceed to the rise of Protestantism. When we say Protestantism, it's all about the faith, the practice, and church order of the Protestant Church. Protestantism started in Northern Europe in the early 16th century as a reaction to the abuses being committed by the Papa, the clergy, and the monks and nuns of the Roman Catholic Church. In this period, on behalf of 14 free cities of Germany and 6 Lutheran princes, a protest was made against that decision. Those who made protests were called Protestants. Nowadays, when you say Protestant, it refers to one of the Christian church separating from the Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation or from another Protestant church to defend beliefs and practices. Based on the book, there are 4 beliefs and practices of Protestants. The principle of justification by faith. The second one is the priesthood of all believers. Third one is the authority and sufficiency of the Bible. And the last one is the right of duty of individual judgment in matters of faith. Protestantism generally rejects as an scriptural the ceremonial reverence of saints, monasticism, clerical celibacy, and all but 2 sacraments. Along Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, Protestantism became one of the 3 major forces in Christianity. Protestantism influenced a number of countries in Northern Europe. In Switzerland, Jean Calvin, a Frenchman educated in law and humanities who had to flee France due to his conversion to Protestantism, established a form of Protestantism known as Calvinism. These Calvinism theoretical doctrines emphasize the sovereignty of God and the bestowal of grace, and that specifically includes election of predestination, limited atonement, total depravity, irresistibility of grace, and the perseverance of saints. And Calvinism, they believe that human being is predestined either by election to an eternal state of blessed in God's presence or by reprobation to a state of misery and alienation to God. Under Calvin, Geneva, Switzerland became a haven for Protestant exiles coming from France, England, Holland, and Scotland. Also, John Calvin established colleges in Geneva and other places in Switzerland.
In English Reformation, in 1534, King Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who had not been able to give him an heir to the throne. Catherine was Catholic and annulment was not allowed by the Catholic Church. The Church's refusal to annul his marriage of Catherine led King Henry VIII to persuade the English Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, which severed all relations of the English sovereign with the papacy and established the Anglican Church. This was the beginning of the separation of the Anglican Church, also known as the Protestant Church of England, from the Church of Rome. Henry VIII included the schools in his policy on the separation of powers. He confiscated the land owned by monasteries and on which schools were built and sold this to his political supporters. Other funds for education were diverted to other purposes. Before this development, about 300 grammar schools had already been established in the country, but with the lack of financial support from the state, many primary schools and grammar schools had to close or retrench their operations. With the succession of the throne in 1558 of Elizabeth I, a consideration portion of the national budget was set aside for education. This succeeded in reversing the situation of the England schools around the 16th and 17th century. Counter-Reformation. If most of the countries in Northern Europe adhere to Protestantism, the Southern European countries of Italy, Spain, Portugal, and France remained loyal subject to the Roman Catholic Church. Yet, the Catholic clergy believed that the Church also needed to be reformed. Majority, if not all of them, had somehow seriously considered Luther's criticism of the Church. The Roman Catholic Church under Pope Paul III convened the Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563 for the purpose of instituting reforms in the Church itself, thereby preventing another breakaway like the one initiated by Luther, realizing that the Protestants utilized education primarily to attract people and indoctrinate them later. The Catholic Church started to use education to her advantage. Orders in the Roman Catholic clergy. In order to carry out these ends, the Church authorized the establishment of several priestly orders that would serve as the educational and social arm of the Church. The Jesuits. The Society of Jesus, popularly known as Jesuits, was established by Ignatius of Loyola from 1491 to 1556, a Spanish noble and soldier in 1540. The aim of this society was expressed in its motto, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, or everything for the greater glory of God. The Jesuits did not concentrate on elementary education. They put greater emphasis on tertiary education for the rigid training of the leaders of both the church and the state. Since its established, this order has been tremendous success in the field of education, implementing educational principles that are still applicable in modern education system. The Jesuits colleges employed excellently trained teachers. Their method of teaching was aimed of doing a small amount of work at a time but making sure it was well done, mastered, and retained. The Jesuits primarily utilized oral instruction, memorization by means of constant repetition, and review. The Jesuits also abolished corporal punishment, instead utilizing rivalry and competition in such activities as debate to motivate the students to study harder. The winner in such competition were given reward and other privileges. It is noteworthy that the Jesuits wrote most of their own textbooks.
The Jansenists. Jansenism Port Royal is another teaching congregation in France. John de Virginie Horan, also known as Abbé de Saint-Cyran, was its founder at 1635. In 1637, it started to take female pupils, and convent were transformed to little schools of Port Royal in 1646. Jansenist curriculum is known for French and foreign languages and logic. In line with the philosophy of René Descartes that the human nature is essentially bad, it aimed at development of the child's moral and religious character because they believed that a child tends to do wrong when left with their own impulses. It also emphasized the importance of manual labor and works of charity. They discourage too much memory work because they do not believe in memorization. Instead, have an understanding. A teacher is given 6 students to be taught from age 10 up to age 16. Male students were taught by male teachers as well as female students to female teachers. In 1660, the school's operation were suppressed by Louis XIV.
The Christian Brothers. The Institute of the Brothers of Christian Schools was founded by Saint John Baptiste de La Salle at Reims, France in 1684 for the education of boys, especially of poor families. The congregation is now established on all continents. Besides teaching in elementary, secondary, and teacher training schools, the brothers administer and staff colleges, agricultural schools, welfare or corrective schools, technical, trade, and commercial schools, and house of retreat. During these Christian schools, teacher will be act as a facilitator, and pupils were classified according to the ability of individual. The teachers will also known during this time as Christian Brothers.